In the annals of Roman history, few emperors are as enigmatic and as impactful as Hadrian. Known for his monumental building projects, his military reforms, and his complex relationships with both his people and his gods, Hadrian was a ruler who sought to transform the Roman Empire, not just through conquest, but through vision. From the construction of the iconic Hadrian's Wall in Britain to his architectural marvels in Rome, Hadrian's reign marked an era of cultural flourishing and peace. Yet beneath the grandeur was a man of great ambition, wisdom, and personal turmoil. But how did the young man from Hispania rise to power, and what drove him to leave such an indelible mark on the empire? Join us in the first chapter of a journey into the life of the emperor who redefined what it meant to rule, and whose legacy would resonate through the ages. Discover the man behind the monuments, the warrior behind the crown, and the architect of an empire's transformation. The man known to history as Hadrian, or Publius Aelius Hadrianus, was born in 76 AD in the southern Spanish provincial city of Italica. His mother, Demetria Paulina, was of Spanish descent, a family hailing from the wealthy city of Gades, modern-day Cadiz, which is one of the wealthiest cities in Roman Spain. Hadrian's father, Publius Aelius Hadrianus, was a wealthy Roman senator who had also served in the Roman army. Indeed, his mother, Paulina, was the sister of Marcus Ulpius Trajanus, who was the biological father of the future Roman Emperor Trajan. This link to Trajan would prove to be crucial to Hadrian's advancements later in his life. The Roman Empire of the late 1st century was vast, having been gradually expanded over the previous 3 centuries through various wars against rival kingdoms and tribes throughout Europe and beyond. It had few, if any, rivals that could match its technological advancement and military. Most importantly, its military was perhaps the most advanced, organized, and capable fighting machine the world had ever seen up until that time. However, despite Rome's supremacy, it had, since the reign of Augustus, been ruled over by one man, the emperor. After the death of Julius Caesar by assassination in 44 BC, his nephew Augustus claimed power in a bloody civil war and then made himself the first Roman emperor. Since then, power in the empire lay in the hands of the emperors in collaboration with the Roman army, which would itself become the real arbiter of power in the Roman Empire over the following centuries, as no emperor could hope to last for long without its powerful backing. Indeed, the Roman emperor at the time of Hadrian's birth was Vespasian, who seized power with the backing of the eastern legions of the Roman army in 69 AD. After his death in 79 AD, supreme power in Rome had been handed down to the Flavian sons, Titus and then later Domitian, who would himself rule the empire for 15 years. When Hadrian was 9 or 10 in 86 AD, both his mother and father died, meaning that he and his older sister were placed under the protection of Publius Aelius and their second cousin Trajan, who by this time was an important army officer of his own command. Trajan had also been born in the Spanish city of Italica, but although he saw himself, as did Hadrian, as an upstanding Roman, they faced resentment and ridicule from the old Roman nobility, who did not take well to anyone from the provinces who aspired to office within Rome itself. After his parents' death, Hadrian initially stayed in Spain for 4 years but was later summoned by Trajan to Rome. Around 91 AD, nearly at the same time, Trajan himself was given the powerful position of consul. Hadrian continued to expand his education whilst in Rome and earned himself the nickname Greekling due to his love of all things Greek. Indeed, Greek culture would become one of the greatest influences and loves of Hadrian's life. He then returned to Spain and was further educated in more practical skills such as hunting and outdoor sports, which were in essence a kind of basic training for later military service. Hadrian then went back to Rome, aged 18, to take a role in the imperial administration before joining the army as a tribune or officer and serving with various legions near the river Danube in modern-day Eastern Europe. After proving his ability, he was promoted and posted to the 5th Legion in the modern-day Balkans. Then, in 96 AD, the Emperor Domitian was assassinated by court officials, which prompted the Roman Senate to appoint Marcus Cocceius Nerva as the new emperor. This was a strange choice, as Nerva was old and childless, meaning he was bound to only be emperor for a short time, which proved to be the case. He was also highly unpopular with the Roman army, which led him to seek its backing by appointing Hadrian's cousin Trajan as co-emperor and his adopted son and successor. Indeed, it is suggested that Nerva was forced by Trajan to name him as his successor. If he didn't, Trajan would depose him by force. This agreement met with the favor of the military, as Trajan himself was highly popular with the ordinary Roman soldiers, and given Nerva's age, Trajan was likely to be emperor sooner rather than later. All of a sudden, Trajan and indeed Hadrian were catapulted into the limelight of power within Rome, and as Trajan himself had no children, Hadrian was the frontrunner or at least a strong candidate to become the next emperor himself. It was therefore no surprise that only 1 year and 4 months after attaining power, the aging Nerva died, meaning that Trajan was subsequently proclaimed emperor. His ascension to power also marked a considerable turning point in Roman history, as he was the first Roman emperor other than Claudius to have been born outside Italy itself. Indeed, he was firmly seen by the old Roman nobility as an outsider, which did nothing but prompt Trajan to promote more outsiders, including Hadrian, to powerful positions within his administration. This, in return, greatly annoyed the old Roman aristocracy, but they had little choice but to accept the new emperor's decisions, as he had, after all, the support of the military. Hadrian's continued rise to power was also aided by his close ties with Trajan's wife, Plotina, who was herself also Spanish and had, along with her husband Anthiades, who himself would become Hadrian's bodyguard, raised and protected Hadrian after his father's death. Being an intelligent and influential woman, Plotina may have, in some respects, been responsible for Hadrian's education in Greek culture, which she herself held to be superior to Roman. Indeed, as her marriage with Trajan was childless, she perhaps looked upon Hadrian as her own son and would later, around 100 AD, arrange the marriage of Hadrian to her grandniece Sabina. Hadrian was less than pleased about the arrangement, however, being disposed to the intimate company of men rather than women, and his marriage to Sabina would prove to be notoriously distant and cold. In 101 AD, Hadrian was elected to become a quaestor within the Roman Senate, as which he would act as a go-between between the emperor and the Senate itself. By this time, there were a large number of senators who, like Hadrian, hailed from the provinces, but there still remained a hard core of the old Roman aristocracy within the chamber. On one occasion, Hadrian read a speech of the emperor's to the Senate, which sparked a chorus of laughter within the chamber due to his accent and pronunciation. Hadrian then took this to heart and endeavored afterwards to improve his Latin, and said he spoke the language as well as possible given his previous background. The real power in the empire was based on the backing of the military. Trajan had to spend a large amount of time securing its approval. He then sought to bring this about by embarking on his now legendary invasion of the area of Eastern Europe then called Dacia. Taking on the Dacians was a risky venture for the Roman emperor, as they had fought with them before during the reign of Domitian, in which an entire legion was massacred. Trajan wasn't swayed by this, however, and he then crossed the border of the Roman Empire into Eastern Europe along with Hadrian at the head of 2 legionary columns backed up by as many as 9 legions, which numbered in the region of 70 to 80,000 troops or more. Hadrian was Trajan's personal entourage at the start of the campaign, but was later excused from military service and returned to Rome to take the post of tribune of the plebs. This was an administrative position which, in essence, was supposed to represent the interests of the public within the Roman government. In the meantime, Trajan's armies advanced into the heart of Dacia, burning villages and settlements along the way until they met and defeated the armies of the Dacian king Decebalus at the Second Battle of Tapi in September 101 AD. However, Trajan then grew concerned about the onset of winter and decided to wait until the following spring before resuming hostilities. Thus, Decebalus then used the lull in the fighting to regroup his forces and even launched a counterattack in the winter of 101 to 102 AD, which resulted in another defeat for the Dacians in the Battle of Adam Clysae. This reversal, in essence, forced King Decebalus to sue for peace, which was then agreed in 102 AD with favorable terms for the Romans over their defeated enemies. This effectively resulted in a large part of Dacia along the Danube being ceded to Rome, while Dacia itself had become a vassal-like state, which would receive money and troops from Rome in return for acting as a buffer zone between Rome and the various migrating tribes to the east. Decebalus had no intention of being Rome's vassal, however, and after an interval of several years in which he used Rome's money to rebuild his forces and fortifications, he launched a surprise attack in 105 AD into the region of Dacia he had lost to Rome 3 years before. This took Trajan by surprise at first, but he soon gathered his forces and constructed a massive bridge over the Danube, now named Trajan's Bridge, which according to accounts, spanned over 3,700 feet in length. This formed the gateway which Trajan's legions then used to march headlong into the Dacian heartlands, marking the start of the Second Dacian War in 105 AD. Hadrian was again in Trajan's personal service during the early stages of the campaign, but later went off to command his own legion during the conflict. This helped to mark Hadrian out as a commander, which would later be crucial in helping him to secure his popularity with the Roman army in the coming years. Trajan's armies then marched into the heart of Dacia, this time advancing in 3 columns which then surrounded the Dacian capital of Sarmizegetusa in modern Transylvania. After besieging the city and cutting off its water supplies, Sarmizegetusa eventually fell, and it was then razed to the ground to prevent it from being used as a rallying point in the future. Decebalus had managed to escape the city during its fall, but he had also hidden the contents of his massive treasury somewhere nearby. Its location was revealed to the Romans by a member of the Dacian king's entourage, leading to its recovery. Supposedly, the treasure consisted of over 150 metric tons of gold and over 300 metric tons of silver. This was then used after the Dacian War to help fund various building projects and celebrations. One of these still stands in Rome to this day, being Trajan's Column, which depicts the chain of events of the Dacian Wars and is still one of the primary sources on the conflict for historians. Decebalus was himself then tracked down and cornered, but he committed suicide by slitting his throat to prevent himself from being taken alive. Rome was now victorious, and Dacia was now firmly under its control. But Trajan's campaigns would prove to be some of the last great expansions of the empire, as after his reign, merely maintaining the massive expanse of Roman territory proved to be difficult enough without the added costs in money and manpower of further expansion. Hadrian himself had emerged from the Dacian Wars as a seasoned military commander and now also had gained first-hand experience in the everyday lives of Roman soldiers, which later proved to be crucial in him being able to keep the Roman army on his side. He was then, in 107 AD, made the governor of Lower Pannonia, partly as a reward and partly due to his knowledge of the region, which was near the former Dacian territories. The appointment may also have been down to his military experience, as there were a number of hostile barbarian tribes to the north and west, including the Sarmatians, who had been allied with the Dacians against Rome in Trajan's wars. Hadrian was now, despite only being in his early 30s, a high-ranking general as well as a talented administrator and politician. He was clearly marked out for greater things, and this was further borne out when, in 108 AD, he was elected to become one of Rome's 2 consuls. Despite his young age, the post was the highest administrative position within the Roman state and represented the pinnacle of Hadrian's political career before becoming emperor himself. After his tenure as consul ended, Hadrian then traveled to Athens around 112 AD, where he was made the city's chief magistrate for a short time. This reaffirmed his love and connection with the city and Greece itself, but after this, not much is known about Hadrian's life, which seems to have been a period of relative obscurity for him. And so, once again, he was summoned to accompany the emperor on his next large-scale military expedition against Rome's great rival in the east, Parthia. The Parthian Empire was one of the few people who could match Rome's power. Indeed, they had, like the Dacians before them, been responsible for defeating and humiliating Roman armies in past confrontations. They proved themselves to be perhaps the most stubborn and persistent of Rome's enemies during the middle period of the empire, and Rome continually struggled to make or hold any of its periodic gains in the Middle Eastern region during its various wars against Parthia. Another reason for the forthcoming war was that Parthia had placed its own puppet king onto the throne of Armenia, who Rome found unacceptable. Indeed, both Rome and Parthia had had a kind of shared overlordship of the kingdom of Armenia since the reign of Nero, and therefore Parthia placing its own king onto the Armenian throne without Rome's approval was seen as grounds for an invasion. Trajan possibly had other motives for an expansion into the east, as it is suggested that he wanted to also gain control over the east and trade routes, which passed partly through the Persian Gulf ports in modern-day southern Iraq, which had access to India and the Far East. The expedition had been long in the planning and involved up to a dozen legions, which, again like Trajan's Dacian campaigns, numbered in the region of 80,000 plus troops. Hadrian was appointed to Trajan's entourage once again and accompanied the emperor to secure Armenia in late 114 AD. His forces there marched south into Mesopotamia itself, where he finally took the city of Ctesiphon near the northern shores of the Persian Gulf in 116 AD. This marked the farthest extent of Rome's eastern expansion, and in many ways, Trajan's reign marked the high point of the Roman Empire in terms of its size. The emperor had successfully reduced the Parthians to the status of a near vassal state, but the campaign had taken a considerable toll on his health, as he was now in his early 60s. Hadrian was then made governor of Syria later in the passing campaign, which effectively placed him in charge of the eastern armies after Trajan's impending departure from the eastern theater. The emperor then left the Middle East to return to Rome in the summer of 117 AD, as his health was declining further, but he was destined never to enter the imperial city again and died on the 8th of August 117 AD in modern-day southern Turkey. As he had no children, Trajan's succession had been in a state of confusion for some years, but then one day after the emperor's death, his wife Plotina presented a document which stated that the emperor on his deathbed had adopted Hadrian as his son and successor. This was controversial, as the emperor had not signed the document himself, leading to rumors that Hadrian was Plotina's choice as successor and not Trajan's. However, it is highly likely that Hadrian was Trajan's intended successor, as he was the emperor's highest-ranking and most experienced direct relative. Hadrian was, however, fortunate that a large number of Rome's legions were already under his command in the Middle East due to the Parthian campaign. This made securing the army's approval of him becoming emperor easier, as well as making any rival claim elsewhere in the empire more difficult, as no one could match the sheer numbers of Hadrian's troops in the east. The Eastern legion's loyalty was then secured with the customary bonus or bribe, and Hadrian was proclaimed Caesar by the Eastern armies. He then sent a letter to the Senate, who had little choice but to accept his succession. Hadrian was now the emperor of the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever known, with the start of his reign coinciding with Rome being at the very zenith of its power. The empire now stretched from northern England to the deserts of North Africa and from the shores of western Spain to the shores of the Persian Gulf. The new emperor was now faced with the difficult challenge of securing his own rule and then the choice of either further expanding or securing the empire's borders. His predecessor, Trajan, had been one of the most successful and popular of all Rome's emperors, but would Hadrian now emulate or surpass his predecessor or squander his great inheritance? The decisions and pressure he now faced were huge, and the new emperor would need all of his knowledge, experience, and skill to overcome the challenges which lay before him. As we close the first chapter of Hadrian's life, we see a man whose ambition, vision, and sometimes ruthless decisions shaped the course of the Roman Empire. His reign brought peace and prosperity, but it also marked the beginning of a profound transformation in Roman identity, one that would continue to echo long after his time. Hadrian's legacy, built on walls, temples, and cities, was just the beginning. What drove him to leave such an enduring mark on the world? What challenges awaited him as his reign progressed? These questions remain as we move forward in his journey. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Emperor Hadrian's life. Be sure to stay with us as we continue to uncover the complexities of his reign in the next chapter of his remarkable story.